Hi, Marcus and Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this interview today. I know both of you, you have this online course for design thinking, targeting educators, pre-K to 12, right? Grade 12. So
Yep.
maybe just first start introducing yourselves, like what's your background? What does it have to do with the design thinking?
Sure.
Yeah.
Shall I start, perhaps? Because
Please.
I am not historically the educator, but I think Jennifer and I went way back to university and our world had really converged. So after my first degree, and my degree was in engineering, and then I studied product design. And so the road to design thinking was rather interesting in the sense that I started off working in traditional product design, and then I basically evolved into a creative director running different design disciplines. So I suppose that's when the cross-discipline nature of the work started to come into my world. And eventually I went into the world of branding, work with brand strategists, and then quite organically went into then, I suppose, user-centric design thinking. So that is really flipping the coin, I suppose, on the one side, speaking in the brand world to marketers and looking at the world through the lens of brands. But on the other side, in the world of design thinking, then is really looking at the world through the user lens. So basically what my role is now is in fact in design and innovation consulting, and inevitably, and I think the training aspect of it, which starts to converge with what Jennifer does historically as a teacher, is that it requires a lot of education of clients, for example, organizations, to adopt new practices in innovation through design thinking. And that's how I got into the world of training, in fact, quite organically through the consulting and design work.
Right, so you were training corporate clients, right?
Yes, yes.
How about Jennifer?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me on your channel, Elaine. Really excited to be here talking about something I'm really passionate about. So I'm an independent educational consultant, and I also teach part-time at the University of Hong Kong on a couple of programs. So one is the Masters of Education program. The other one is the Postgraduate Diploma of Education. So it's helping to train newly qualified teachers that have had 1 to 2 years of classroom experience. I actually was a classroom teacher for 27 years. I'd like to start it at 12. Thank you for laughing.
You can pass that.
That's the beauty of Zoom, right? That we can have beautiful filters. So I was in the classroom and experienced this wonderful, glorious 27 years teaching 10 to 18-year-olds. So my discipline area was mathematics, but I also taught a lot of other interdisciplinary subjects. And that's how Marcus and I met in first year university in maths lectures.
Yep.
Yeah, not too long ago.
No, not long ago at all.
I see.
And now as a consultant, I partner up with schools and different educational institutions to help develop curriculum and unit planning. And then I'm excited actually to talk a little bit more about this design thinking program and online course that we have.
Great. So have you been teaching in Hong Kong then?
Yes, I taught in Hong Kong. I also taught in New York, which was a wonderful experience, at the United Nations School. And Marcus and I discussed that we were both in New York, but I don't think we had any overlap. We both lived there. Yeah, no overlap. Yeah, so mainly in Hong Kong, mainly in international schools. So I've consulted for the IB for developing their new curriculum for the maths, and just mainly work on the international arena.
I see. So I really want to know like why you came up with this online design thinking course. But before we do that, I want you to explain what is design thinking. For those of our audience who's not really familiar, and everybody maybe has a slightly different definition.
Mm.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll speak from the corporate as well as, in a way, the governmental context, now that I have also done some consultation work outside of the corporate space. I would say design thinking at the large sense is a human-centered design, human-centered problem-solving process. And going beyond the process, it's also a philosophy. So I don't want to let design thinking become a recipe. We want it to become something that embeds into people's muscle memories, and it basically really is a belief. What it is, going into a bit more detail, is I really believe in the power of design thinking in that deep empathy stage of the user as well as the stakeholders. A second part of design thinking is also making sure that we take a step back to frame what is the real problem we're trying to solve. I think that is oftentimes doing the right thing before we go and do it right is very, very, sounds really simple, but not easy to do. So at the end of the day, I think design thinking is about being very close and very basically creating a process around the users and various different stakeholders, and being able to be then more agile in really resolving these different issues, large and small as well.
So, I mean, because you're addressing educators, right? So what if parents ask you, so why do our kids need to learn design thinking? What is that like?
Yep.
Well, kids as well as teachers, in fact. But I'll let Jennifer talk a bit about that. I think just having delved deeper into the education world gave me so much insights on how, in a way, how design thinking really syncs up with the latest philosophy in education. And also, I guess from the institutional and corporate world, we obviously come across all types of colleagues from all types of education systems. And inevitably, everyone is the product of an education system. And I could say that from a corporate side, then we definitely see different people being equipped with different ways of thinking and different ability to solve problems. But I'll let Jennifer talk a bit more about then how it fits within the context of education.
Yeah, especially in Hong Kong, I mean, it used to be, at least, parents are like, oh, I want my kids to be lawyers, doctors, engineers. I want them to make money, right? How do you explain to, even the teachers, like, why did they need to teach design thinking to the kids?
I think Marcus has given me a beautiful segue, an introduction. Describe, I think, the value in education and preparing our students for this really exciting, unknown, it could be volatile, future. There are so many jobs that we know currently do not exist that will be created in the next even 5 years. I would not even say 10 years. I'd say 5 years, even know. And so how are we going to prepare our students, the young, to navigate this landscape of the unknown? And it's also about what Marcus mentioned, the challenging situations and issues of the world. How are we going to equip our students to be able to critically think and solve these huge problems of the world, to be able to navigate ambiguity, to build the creative confidence that we want our students to have. And so it really is an ethos and a philosophy, as Marcus said. It's not a recipe that, we want our students to follow or teachers to follow, but we want them to be equipped with this confidence to be able to navigate problems and work towards solutions, but in a collaborative fashion, while promoting inquiry, using that inquiry-based approach. And so if a parent said that, I would start off by talking about, what is education and what is the purpose of school? Is it really just about academics and regurgitating the academic subjects of school? Or is it about preparing your child to be a citizen of the world that can contribute to society in a positive way? That's what we ultimately want to be, global citizens that contribute to society in a positive way. How can we do that? By confident. Yeah.
And maybe telling parents that some of these jobs, as in like lawyers or even doctors, like the low level ones, might be gone, right? In the next 5 to 6 years.
Well, my brother is a doctor and he actually uses a lot of robotics. So he's moved into the whole area of robotics in Australia, which is really on the cutting edge. And so many of the minor procedures he uses, just using the machines. And I've read lots of studies about how AIs are now being used to actually screen and filter different diseases and symptoms before you actually even get to see the doctor. And so, there's a lot of technological advances in all fields. So we really need to, be aware of the exciting future and that these jobs may no longer exist, as you say.
Yeah, in the future, we might have a little robot that sits on your desktop that tells you like how your health is doing, right?
Exactly. Or a little app.
Yep.
Okay, so why are you offering this online design thinking course to educators? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what's your motivation, and why did it happen now?
I think the trigger of it, to a degree, it's been a long time in coming. And I could say this is where the correlation between everyone who works and anyone, even beyond the education world, we always say that digital transformation has been basically the last 6 months it's like 10 years worth of digital transformation. But that to me is only a change in the channel, and everybody is being forced, kicking and screaming, sometimes myself included, to use various different technological platforms. That's only one, I would say that's only a trigger. It's not really the longer term purpose. And I think the longer term purpose is really, I really find it really serendipitous that Jennifer and I came to the same conclusion, that this would be very valuable to be delivered to teachers on a number of different levels. The most obvious one is the actual type of skills that students need. But that's obviously passed on indirectly through the teachers. And we could probably talk also a little bit about reframing the role of teachers, but I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. On the other side is also I think the change in the channel of teaching, because a lot of collaboration work, and I'm including even in the corporate world, is now being demanded to do online. Short example of that is recently I delivered a project with a research company that went from research all the way to concept delivery to a bank in Indonesia without me flying once. It all happened in 10 weeks. It's entirely done remotely. And not only has the channel changed, obviously we had to do it on Zoom and Mural and various different digital platforms, but ultimately that's only a tool. What we've realized is the entire collaborative process, the role between client and consultancy or teacher and students, in fact, is being deeply challenged to evolve, right? And the other side is the collaborative process. Can it be the same one directional, I guess, imparting of information? It really needs, even we talked about the length of this conversation. People have limited capability to keep their attention focused for more than a certain amount of time. On the other side is also the types of interactions, I guess the timeliness. We will talk a bit about also synchronous and asynchronous also. So ultimately, it's also about a change in process, a change in the development of thoughts, the absorption of knowledge or information, and on the other side, the synthesis of knowledge. All of that is being challenged as a journey. If you don't mind me using the design thinking cliche of journey mapping, it is a journey for everyone in that process. But at the same time, it's also the journey of, I suppose, absorbing of knowledge, internalization of knowledge, and then the synthesis of ideas. And I think that is where the similarity to education is, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of challenges, have you guys encountered, like doing this program online, or teaching or, educating people online?
I think that's, I think Marcus has again given me a great foundation to be able to springboard off what you said, and that transformation of pedagogy. So just for people that are not educators out there, pedagogy means the craft of teaching and learning. And so our craft of teaching and learning has had to completely change and transform in this virtual online situation that we have. And Marcus was alluding to, no longer are students and learners passive receivers of information. No longer are teachers just transmitting information and deliverers of knowledge, but there is a partnership. So the role of the teacher and the learner is completely being transformed and redefined, that we are in partnership with our learners. And so the challenges of online, I just gave a parent talk this morning, actually, and we were talking about the challenges. And one of them was lack of interactivity. So I asked the parents, you know, what do you think is one of the challenges that you've noticed with your child learning online? And one of the biggest, I think, challenges that was outlined was about the lack of interactivity. Now, my research areas are twofold. One is teaching for deep conceptual understanding and making sure that learners critically think and engage the intellect. And the other research area is educational technology. And so there are some research frameworks that actually explicitly outline elements that are effective for online learning. And one of them is called the community of inquiry. So it's very interesting. Please feel free to look it up. And they talk about 3 important elements in the online environment in order to promote that community of inquiry. And that is social presence as an element, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And so if we acknowledge that there is a social presence, that means that it should be on the forefront of our minds when we're designing any long online course, that there are peer interactions, there are social interactions, and there's opportunities for learners to be able to collaborate. So we've kind of designed our online course not as, so if you wanted to be a passive receiver, you probably wouldn't get much out of the course. You probably won't learn as much. We have put a lot of interactivity and prompts to help our teachers that are taking the course to process and synthesize the ideas, and then to take action. So that action means creating artifacts that showcase their learning, that show us that they have a deep conceptual understanding of the material that we're presenting. So it's a partnership that we're taking with the learners on our course.
So, you know, especially on Zoom, sometimes people like to shut their cameras and, you know, they don't even show their face. And when you ask questions, people are like quiet. Like, how do you deal with that?
That's an art, and it's a craft teacher. And I think, Marcus, you and I have got so much experience with running workshops and trying to encourage that. And if we design engaging, highly motivating learning experiences, then you won't have that problem. So, for example, let me give you one strategy that I normally use in workshops. We co-create essential agreements at the beginning when we first meet. And when we co-create these essential agreements, normally some of the participants will say, let's keep our cameras on. Let's make sure that we, you know, respond and discuss and talk and answer questions and keep our cameras on. So rather than me sharing a list of rules that teachers have to follow, teachers and learners actually want to be engaged. If you ask them, if, you know, they don't want to waste their time and they don't want to have you on in the background, they want to be engaged. So if we design purposefully highly engaging activities, then it will be more likely that they will engage. And that can start off with essential agreements at the beginning of your time together. Yeah.
And especially with design thinking, I mean, in the offline world before COVID, you know, designers always need to have a white wall next to them and a lot of post-it notes and even like post-it like 3M boards, right? Like, you know, how do you translate that type of interactivity onto online?
Marcus, you?
Yes, super interesting. I would say different levels of engagement again. And even through designing our course, I've learned a lot from Jennifer also and started displacing a lot of those in fact, types of interactions into the corporate world, and just to keep everyone engaged. I mean, in a micro interactive way, obviously, there, even on the platform we're in, like Zoom, we could do polls, we could post questions. So listening is no longer passive. We are, in fact, encouraging people to actively listen. And it's not only in a pop quiz sort of way, but making sure that people are absorbing the information and at the same time soliciting responses, like even in a very, very simple micro interaction like a poll, so that it keeps people to be engaged with. In fact, they don't feel alone. They're feeling, as Jennifer was saying, that you're still in a room interacting with other people, just through a different means, right? But you feel their brain waves, if you will. You know, you're still receiving what people are thinking, your peers are thinking. In a deeper way, I would say, and how we get around the post-it obviously is with various different platforms, such as Mural. And that is probably deeper into the engagement, whereby then it's no longer just about absorbing information, but the participants need to synthesize information, analyze information, and then cluster information. And those types of, basically, we are reenacting what's happening on a post-it wall in real life into the digital realm, but real time. The great thing is you still see what all the other participants are doing. And added beauty on that is that type of collaborative process could be also, what to me is, it's a great beauty is, it's no longer about the loudest person in the room hogging the stage, you know, getting that spotlight, because a lot of these online collaborative platforms allow the more shy people or the less outspoken people to still have their voice through writing post-its, putting things in, even in after hours between the face-to-face times, or, you know, the actual synchronous sessions. It allows people to, I guess, put longer thoughts, let things settle a bit, because some people might not be the type who would be immediately throwing out their input. They need to have things brew a little bit. And I think this is where we are, you know, we're really learning a new way of collaboration, because it's no longer about whoever is the loudest person or the most senior person to have the biggest share of voice in the room. And so that's where I think a lot of the ways we could increase the amount of interactivity is from very simple response to much more, in a way, later on, I call it the more heavy lifting coming from the learners, because they have to synthesize and they have to collaborate in a different medium.
Right. Plus, we'll lose the post-it note too, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So what types of new collaboration came out of this? I mean, other than what you've just mentioned, right? Did you discover, you know, new ways of collaboration online?
I was going to just mention after, and this with your question, Elaine, actually, about the power of asynchronous collaborative learning. And so a lot of teachers sometimes think students only learn when they're in front of you. But actually, one of the affordances of the e-learning landscape is that asynchronous learning can allow a student or a learner to access learning anytime, anywhere, where it's convenient for them when they're ready. So it's that power and affordance of ubiquity. You want to give the learner more agency and more ownership by deciding when to access. And because it's digital, as Marcus said, you're giving everybody a voice, and it's not about the loudest person anymore. And so if there are any educators here listening to this, and you're a Google App school, you'll probably be using Jamboard, which has lots of, you know, post-it note options digitally. I use Padlet a lot, which we use on our online course. And so we've got teams that have joined our online course, and we're really happy that teams from the same school have joined, because they can then collaborate and they can discuss and take this forward in their school and embed it in a more meaningful way. We're hoping to connect other educators from around the world on this course as well, so that they can share their experience and ideas through the prompts and the online discussions, which are facilitated asynchronously. So we have the course is asynchronous, but we also have a synchronous part too, because we want to utilize the power of both and the balance between both. So there's a synchronous workshop, 90 minutes, this Saturday, the 19th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, we get to meet the educators that are on our course and to really unpack the design thinking process further, to address particular challenges perhaps that our learners on our course are facing. And so we're pretty excited about that workshop coming up.
Okay, so just to clarify, when you say asynchronous, so that means the course itself is an online course, is on video, where people can take anytime, anywhere, any, you know.
Much more than that.
And then you have a synchronous time where you meet them face to face. Is that right?
So the online blended learning environment has been completely redefined. So in traditionally an asynchronous learning environment, online learning environment is seen as watching hour-long videos and its transmission. So it's that traditional pedagogy that we talked about before, that, you know, you're a passive receiver of information. So our videos are 1 minute long. They're 1 minute, 30 seconds long. So that means, how are our learners engaging in this online course asynchronously? So through a variety of different strategies, such as, so Harvard have a project called Project Zero for educators, and the project is called Visible Thinking Routines. So we use prompts from visible thinking routines to help our teachers digest, synthesize, and then communicate and articulate their understanding. And so we give them certain prompts, whether it's a graphic, whether it is some reading material, whether it's a website, so it's multimedia. Sometimes it could be a video from somewhere else, but our own videos we've created about 1 minute, no longer than 2 minutes long. So very different landscape of asynchronous online learning. Marcus,
Right.
did you to that?
Yeah, yes. I think the beauty of it is we create prompts. We sometimes provide resources and links to the learners, but they literally have to go out for a treasure hunt, come back, synthesize their information, and then be able to play it back into their understanding of it, which is really, you know, if you think about that, even in an online traditional corporate design thinking workshop, I'm beginning to integrate a lot of these techniques in there, in between the actual face-to-face, I wouldn't say face-to-face, but synchronous sessions. And what I found is it really allows everybody to go out and find what inspires them, and then they can come back and share it, or they would have created a concept around that. And there are, in fact, a lot of, sometimes to me, really hard parts of the training in design thinking, like the define part. You know, I'm sure you've delivered that before also, Elaine, where define, it is so hard. And some people literally freak out and they freeze and they don't contribute because it is such a hard conceptual thing to get their head around in front of all your peers. And instead, I've deconstructed that part into create a draft sentence for yourself. Then we'll do group work, share it with your team and co-create your team's version, and then share it with the rest of the teams. So you were basically slowly scaffolding them. And what I found is it gives them so much more confidence in that learning process, letting myself do it in the safety of my privacy, in my own time. Then you share it with the team in a more intimate setting with the 4 closest people with you in the course. And then you share it publicly, not publicly, but within the larger course. And that is so much more effective because it might be taking place over like a 4-day period. And it sinks in that much better than a half-hour process in our 1.5-day face-to-face version.
I see. Okay, so for the audience sake, when you say define, the design thinking process, the second phase, right? Well, not phase, but empathy, define, design, prototype, test, right? Okay.
Yeah, so it is one of these really hard processes where they have to think quite abstractly and think backwards to a degree on forming a challenge.
So does it mean that there is a group of people who attend this online course, and throughout the course they can sync up with other people in the course to do these exercises, right? And they don't know each other, right? Before. Okay, so they need to find their virtual classmates to do their homework together.
We provide that. So we actually facilitate the discussions, and we provide different platforms to allow them to be able to collaborate and discuss. Yeah.
I see. Got it. Got it. Okay, great. So how has this changed the roles and dynamics of the teachers and learners? Because traditionally teachers are like, I tell you what to do kind of traditional, right? And then you mentioned being a partner, as in like a facilitator. Like, can you explain more about how that dynamic shifts?
I like to
Hong Kong, right? Where the culture is very top down also.
I like to use this particular phase to describe our changing role in the classroom. So we used to be the sage on the stage. We then moved to be the guide on the side. But now, with this transformation of pedagogy, we're now the meddler in the middle. So it means that we're not even the guide on the side, but we're really giving our students opportunities to direct their learning based on their interest. And we are posing prompts. We're trying to give them lots of questions to think about, to guide their thinking. And it's about giving our students, I think, that ownership and agency, which sometimes we call it personalized learning. So in the online environment, something that is a bit of a buzzword in education at the moment is personalized learning. So how can we allow our students to be able to flourish and reach their potential by personalizing their learning, but that still incorporates collaborative learning as well, like collaboration and peer support and peer assessment. So how has it changed? It's baby steps, I say. Like I found that the schools and the teachers that I work with, if they have been teaching in a very traditional way to what you described, Elaine, where you're just a transmitter of knowledge and information, it actually hasn't worked under these current circumstances.
Oh, yeah. Because the students will fall asleep, right? Or turn off the camera.
Yep, exactly.
No, they don't even have to turn up. They're at home. So they'll be unmotivated, disengaged. They won't turn up to your lessons. They won't do anything. So if you don't rethink about your approach to learning and teaching in the classroom with your students, then, how are we going to captivate them, motivate them, and continue to help them in the learning process? So it's really redefining and I think transforming our practice so that, well, to cater for this like exciting unknown world that we're living in, this volatile world that we're living in at the moment.
Yeah, and justify to parents as to why they still need to pay tuition, right? Because I've heard, because of COVID, a lot of kids are stuck at home, and then parents are like, why are you paying so much tuition when they're just sitting at home, watching videos, right? Yeah. Marcus, you had something?
I was going to say, whether it's in the teaching context, and I suppose teaching contexts have similarities when it comes to the students. What I found really heartening seeing teachers' learning process, own learning process, is they are very, very thirsty and very proactive learners. So that in itself is not a problem. But if you displace this theme within the corporate also is, rather than fighting the online behavior and fighting the technology, in fact, take the momentum of what people do online. And let me give you an example. It's like in between, say, a workshop situation, and now what could have been a day and a half might be chopped into 3 sessions over 1 week of no more than 2 hours each. But what we do is then encourage people to go out and look for YouTube video, go out and look for case studies, like basically capitalize on what people do online anyway, on Facebook or on YouTube, and take it back. So basically they are synthesizing their learning through, in fact, yes, you might be putting it within a commercial context in those cases, but you're basically using the behavior that people already do online, except we're contextualizing it in the larger learning experience. So why fight it if that's already a natural behavior? But the upside of that is people are, in fact, sometimes bringing in things even from a left field, and they feel like they are contributing back, and they are, in fact, integrating what they already see online, but in a thoughtful, in a curated, and in a more, I guess, prompted way, because we are giving them a direction and framing a certain thing that they need to go out and seek. So I think this is where we really are using the medium, in fact, and using the existing behavior, but framing it within an educational context.
So what kind of mindset changes do you think educators have to, you know, have to be able to actually do this, you know, especially online, right? It's hard enough to teach design thinking itself and then do it remotely, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's a small percentage of educators in certain parts of the world that have left the profession because because, you know, if you don't change, transform, or rethink how you're approaching learning with your students, then it's very difficult, right, to survive. Fortunately, I think, as Marcus mentioned, teachers, we love learning. I think that's why we go into education. We're lifelong learners, and we're constantly thinking about how we can evolve as teachers, and we're constantly reflecting on our own practice as well. And it's something that we continuously do. We continuously formatively assess our students, lesson by lesson, minute by minute even. And so I think with teachers, I think many have adapted so well under the circumstances and given such a short period of time. Research says that, you know, to really create and design an effective e-learning program, it takes 6 to 9 months. Now, teachers in some regions were given 3 days, or one, you know, in when it was Chinese New Year here, teachers and schools were given 1 week. So I think under the circumstances of the short time period, schools have done an amazing job, and the community and the sharing on a global level has actually been phenomenal, the support. So I found that teachers, I think, have really come together to support each other, and there are so many different groups and forums where we can go and seek advice and to, you know, really receive that support during this time.
Right. So I remember, and maybe Marcus, you have also gone through the local education, you know, when we were kids, you know, junior and, you know, high school, where exam is such a huge part. And, you know, the Educational Bureau, if that doesn't change, like, how do you bridge what, you know, kids learn in an interactive way to the exam that they have to go through, you know?
I can speak to the exam and education and the tertiary expectations, because tertiary needs to change their expectations, and they did this year. So I've done some consulting work for the International Baccalaureate. They actually had to cancel their external examinations this year. In the UK, yes, in the UK, the external matriculation certificate was cancelled this year. And yet universities, because of COVID. So because of this situation, there is a silver lining, right? And I see that silver lining is, okay, if these huge organizations canceled their matriculation certificates for university, how did these students then be able to apply and get into these tertiary institutions? Which means that now tertiary and universities are rethinking about their qualifications or their requirements for students when they apply. And I'm trying to encourage something more of an e-portfolio, you know, that students showcase a photo album of their learning rather than just a snapshot, which is what an exam is. An exam is one photo and one snapshot of their learning, rather than a beautiful created photo album that showcases all different facets of their learning and their understanding. So I'm hoping that we'll have systemic change from tertiary that will trickle down then to secondary, so that those chains and those handcuffs of those standardized tests will be removed. But for the moment, they're still there, you know, like in Hong Kong, still had the DCEs. They still, and so it's really just, I think, at least allowing tertiary institutions to rethink their requirements for entry. Yeah, and there will be changes. Yeah,
it's only the beginning. We really think that the systemic side of it, you know, end of it, a lot of times is the slowest to change because it's the most established, it's the most complex, you know, it involves the most stakeholders. So this is really a bottom up, in a way, sea change or revolution, hopefully, in education, right? You know, when we're talking only at a pedagogical level at the moment, you know, then there's a curriculum level. We even have a lens like that in our class to help teachers navigate these different altitudes. Eventually, the entire system needs to adapt to a completely different way of learning, and therefore performance assessment for the students needs to change as well. And this is where I find it is so amazing how similar in a way design thinking is, because design thinking could be basically applied to a product level, a service level, a UX level. And then, you know, basically when we talk about service design is integrating the physical, the people, and the digital. And then we're looking at now using design thinking to influence even policy making, you know, at an institutional level. So it really is applying this, I guess, stakeholder centricity and then defining the problem. Basically, it is the same process in now reforming the education system. Might be a how might we question, just the same.
Yeah, I think, you know, especially now, I mean, I've heard a lot of universities are probably going to face some problems with, you know, parents not wanting to pay so much for their kids staying at home and learning remotely. You know, campuses being empty, you know, that is going to force a lot of change, right? And
it is.
that you mentioned about having a photo album of, you know, what people learn. And I noticed my nieces over here, the teachers have to do that work for every single student of how much this kid learned. So there's 20 students, she has to prepare 20 albums. Whereas in Hong Kong, it's the students doing the work for the teachers. You know, the way around, So,
it should be the student. I think it should be the student that chooses what to showcase as evidence of their learning over that period of time, right? Because we want to give students that ownership and agency as well. And I think it's rethinking, I think, the value of remote learning. I just wanted to pick up on that point, you know, that yes, I've heard the same issue with parents, why are we still paying school fees? But the remote learning, the asynchronous combined with the synchronous learning online in a virtual world is as meaningful. In fact, researchers said that online learning is equally as effective as in-person learning. And I shared that bit of research with parents last week in a parent workshop, and they were really surprised. You know, it depends how you design that online learning. Online learning is not just transferring your in-person learning to online. That is not effective e-learning. Effective e-learning takes 6 to 9 months to develop and design, and it's equally as effective if you ensure that you've got those 3 elements from the community of inquiry: social, teaching, and cognitive presence. So something for us to think about, I think, that online learning can be equally as effective as in person, and it's just helping our parents to understand that too.
Okay, previously you mentioned a term called inquiry-based learning. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Oh, Marcus, do you want to start? This is the one that I'm really passionate about too. And
so it is. Well, this is where I think the whole design thinking philosophy and inquiry-based learning is in fact so similar that, you know, really they're just 2 manifestations being applied in potentially different contexts. To me, inquiry-based learning is about giving the learner that responsibility and as well as agency to create their own knowledge. And to me, it's very similar even when we talk about design thinking in the co-creation. Of course, co-creation is one of those tenets that go through design thinking, is allowing the user to, in fact, be really sharing the deeper needs. You know, a lot, as our empathy process in design thinking stresses, is not only about what you functionally need. So to me, it's also bringing in the user as well as potentially the service provider, you know, bringing all of those people to synthesize things. So to me, inquiry-based learning is very much about that co-creation process. It's about, again, helping people also come to a point where you frame what you need and then developing that and iterating that. So there is a lot of similarity to me in the inquiry-based learning. At the end of the day, inquiry-based learning is a service design, because ultimately education is a service. It's a new type of learning experience. And inquiry-based learning to me is the opposite of what I've learned from Jennifer, didactical, where you're a passive receiver of information. So it's the ultimate user centricity, if you will.
Oh, very nicely explained.
Yeah.
Just going to give it the educational context for any educators.
Yeah, please.
This. So there are two schools of thought in the education world. It's the didactic direct instruction on one side of the spectrum, and then on the other side, it's the inquiry-based learning philosophy. And I think that that's a false dichotomy, because it's not that one is better than the other, but it depends when you use them. So with didactic instruction, Marcus and I were talking about this, for low level facts and skills, no problem. It's not that we never tell our students anything, but very low level facts and skills, we can give them some direct instruction. We want to promote that student agency, responsibility, and motivation by putting them in an exploratory learning experience that encourages the inquiry, right? So using questions to guide their inquiry. They could be coming up with those questions. So it could be student-driven questions. It could be questions that we've come up with so that we are guiding our students through that way and allowing your student to explore and inquire. There's much research that supports the student achievement, student deep understanding, as well as the engagement and motivation, which is what I talk about. And I think we're naturally born as inquirers. You know, we are naturally born to ask questions, and that's how we learn. And so to put our students and learners in an environment where they're able to then inquire and to explore will then really, I think, consolidate their learning and help them to understand why and help them understand on a deeper conceptual level.
Do you
exactly.
think,
and
sorry.
No, don't worry. I suppose this is where, through years of delivering design thinking training within a corporate setting, allows me to see what people have unlearned through their years, through their subsequent exposure, or within organizational culture, what sort of skills have been suppressed, right? That a lot of times, even when we go into a prototyping session, I could see the kindergarten versions of these high-end executives coming out, literally. This is a skill that they have. It's just been suppressed within their context a lot of times. And extracting what Jennifer talked about, it is the lateral thinking, it is the abstract thinking, it is the critical thinking. All of those things that inquiry-based teaching and inquiry-based learning is, in fact, keeping those, not only keeping those muscles alive, but in fact training those muscles all the time. And I would say, it is fair to say that in a lot of environments after the tertiary education, those muscles have been atrophied, in fact.
Do you find that you also have to maybe educate the parents as well? Because if they come from a culture, you know, that is dogmatic, that is about telling what kids should do, you know, if they're trained this way in school or online, and then they go back to their lives and you know, they're kind of pressed down again. You know, that would be the opposite effect, right? Like, why are you asking so many questions? Like, you should just shut up and listen to me, you know?
Yeah.
That could be part of the...
Exposed to that traditional approach that I was, that I was exposed to. It's like stand and deliver and you receive. And so in a lot of my school partnerships, I actually give parent workshops because we have to help all members of the school community understand the current research, the current practices, and what is effective for learning. So yeah, very good point about, parents.
Great point.
Yeah, the whole school community is on board.
That's what we mean by being stakeholder centric, is not only the students. Parents are as much of a stakeholder in this ecosystem, right, as the teachers are.
Okay, so lastly, well, it's great understanding all of like the behind the scenes of creating this course. Can you tell us a little bit about this course? When is it happening? When is your asynchronous versus synchronous sessions?
Well, basically our first offering for this course has already started. It runs till I think the 27th, but people could still join, and we'll provide a link for that. And true to the spirit of design thinking also, this is the first beta version. We've put a lot of thoughts in there, but we are going to be also going in with the teachers who are joining the course to also assess the outcome of the course, of their learning as well. So we will be also offering this again in the next iteration very, very soon. And we will be also hopefully be offering more elaborate, I guess, practice-based learning in longer form also to come as well.
I see. Okay. And then there is a synchronous meeting on Saturday, you said?
That's right. Saturday, is it the 14th? No, today's the 14th.
It is the 14th.
Okay, 14th.
Saturday, the 19th.
Saturday,
the 19th.
That's right.
Saturday, the 19th, Hong Kong time. What time?
It's
at 4 p.m.
4 p.m. It's only for those who've signed up, right? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And you can sign up, so feel free. We've just started. It's only the second day so far of a 2-week course. The expectation is around 2 to 3 hours per week, so it's not a huge commitment, and just an introduction really to design thinking for educators, so that educators can have a better understanding of how to integrate this into their school life.
Okay, so it's 2 to 3 hours per week for how many weeks is the
2
curriculum?
weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. Got it. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Marcus and Jennifer.
You're very welcome.
So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing, letting us chat. Thank you.
Yep. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.